The sound of diesel engines roaring to life at 6 a.m. should have been music to my ears. After all, I owned those machines. But watching them roll toward my grandfather's cabin, the place where I'd spent every summer of my childhood, felt like watching a funeral procession for my soul. Margaret Thornfield stood at the edge of my property line, her perfectly manicured finger pointing at my home like she was casting a curse. Her HOA board jacket flapped in the morning breeze as she shouted orders to my own demolition crew. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a chainsaw. "Make sure you get every board, every nail," she barked at Tommy, my foreman of 8 years. "I want this eyesore erased from existence." Tommy glanced at me with confusion written all over his weathered face. He knew who signed his paychecks. But Margaret? She had no clue that the very company she'd hired to destroy my life was mine. I pulled out my phone and dialed Tommy's number. He answered on the first ring, his voice uncertain. "Boss, what's going on here?" "This lady says." "Shut it down, Tommy. All of it. Right now." The engines fell silent, one by one. Margaret's face shifted from triumphant to bewildered as 20,000 pounds of steel and machinery suddenly refused to budge another inch toward my cabin. That's when she spotted me standing in my driveway, phone pressed to my ear, wearing the same company shirt as the crew she thought she controlled. The color drained from her face faster than water through a broken dam. But to understand how we got to this moment, how Margaret Thornfield tried to bulldoze not just my property, but my entire life, I need to take you back 6 months to when this war began. It started the day I inherited Grandpa Joe's cabin on Crystal Lake. The place wasn't much to look at from the outside weathered cedar siding, a wraparound porch that sagged slightly on the left side, and windows that had seen better decades. But it sat on 2 acres of prime lakefront property that had been in my family for 70 years. The cabin represented everything good about my childhood. Summer mornings casting lines off the dock, while Grandpa told stories about building the place with his own hands. Evening bonfires where the whole family would gather, cousins and all, roasting marshmallows and sharing dreams under stars that seemed close enough to pluck from the sky. When the lawyer handed me the deed, I felt like I was inheriting more than property, I was getting my history back. That feeling lasted exactly 3 days. I was unloading my first truck full of belongings when a woman in a crisp white blazer came marching up my gravel driveway like she owned the place. Margaret Thornfield, 52, president of the Lakeside Estates Homeowners Association. She introduced herself with a kind of smile that never reached her eyes. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said, though her tone suggested I was about as welcome as a root canal. "I'm here to discuss some concerns." She handed me a thick manila folder. HOA compliance documents. "You'll need to review these immediately." "Ma'am, I appreciate the welcome, but my property isn't part of your HOA. My grandfather built this place in 1953, decades before your association existed." Margaret's smile turned predatory. "Actually, Mr. Chen, you'll find that changed in 2019 when the county rezoned this area. Every property on Crystal Lake is now subject to our covenants." She pointed to a clause buried on page 47. "Non-compliant structures have 90 days to conform or face enforcement action." My blood ran cold. The cabin might be old, but it was solid, beautiful, and legal. More importantly, it was home. What kind of enforcement action? Demolition, at the owner's expense. She said it so casually, like she was discussing the weather. But her eyes held the gleam of someone who'd been planning this conversation for months. "Michael, I need you to listen carefully." Sarah's voice was tight with concern. "Margaret's technically right about the rezoning, but there are grandfather clauses, exemptions for pre-existing structures. We can fight this. How long will that take? 6 months, maybe a year. Court battles move slow, and Margaret has connections at City Hall. A year of legal fees while Margaret tried to destroy everything my grandfather built? I could feel the weight of 70 years of family history pressing down on my shoulders. There's something else, Sarah continued. Margaret's been buying up lakefront properties for the past 3 years. Always the same pattern: HOA violations, forced sales. Then she swoops in through a shell company and flips them to developers. The pieces click together like a puzzle made of pure greed. This wasn't about HOA compliance. This was about Margaret turning my family legacy into her personal profit center. But Margaret Thornfield had no idea who she was messing with. While she saw a simple homeowner she could bully into submission, I owned Chen Demolition Services, the largest demolition company in 3 counties. I knew every building code, every permit process, every inspector in the city. More importantly, I knew how to tear things down. And sometimes, that's exactly what you need to do to build something better. The next morning brought the first salvo in Margaret's war. A certified letter arrived before I'd even finished my coffee, officially notifying me of 17 HOA violations. Each one carried a $200 daily fine until corrected. Violation 1: structure painted in non-approved color scheme. The cabin's natural cedar, finished the same wood Grandpa had cut from trees on this very property, was apparently too rustic for community standards. Violation 7: dock extends beyond permitted waterline boundaries. The dock Grandpa built in 1955 was suddenly 3 feet too long, despite being grandfathered in by the county for decades. Violation 15: landscaping consists primarily of native wildflowers and uncontrolled vegetation. The meadow my grandmother had cultivated for 40 years, home to butterflies and songbirds, was now considered neglected property management. By Margaret's math, I owed $3,400 immediately, with $3,400 more accruing every single day. I drove straight to City Hall to meet with Jake Morrison, the head building inspector. Jake was old school, been on the job for 30 years and knew every property in the county, like his own backyard. "This is ridiculous, Michael," Jake said, flipping through Margaret's complaint. "Your grandfather's place is historic. We've got photos of it in our 1960s planning documents. It's got more character than half these cookie-cutter mansions going up. So what can you do?" Jake's expression darkened. "That's the problem. Margaret's got the mayor's ear, and the mayor's got development dollar signs in his eyes. Word is, she's promised to bring in a luxury resort if she can assemble enough lakefront property." A resort. Margaret wasn't just trying to steal my cabin, she was planning to pave paradise and put up a parking lot. How long do I have? Officially, 90 days before the HOA can seek a demolition order. Unofficially, Jake leaned back in his chair, I'd start looking for a good lawyer. Margaret doesn't lose fights like this. But Margaret had never fought someone like me before. That weekend, I decided to get to know my neighbors. If Margaret was running some kind of property flipping scam, other families might be suffering too. 2 doors down lived the Kowalski's retired teachers who'd bought their cottage in 1987. Frank answered the door with paint-stained hands and exhaustion in his eyes. "HOA troubles?" I asked. Frank's laugh was bitter. "Troubles doesn't cover it, son. Margaret's been after us for 2 years. Started with complaints about our garden gnomes. Apparently, they're not aesthetically compatible with lakefront living." His wife Linda appeared behind him, wiping tears from her eyes. "We've paid $12,000 in fines so far. Our retirement savings are almost gone." "What kind of fines?" "Everything you can imagine," Linda said. "Our mailbox was 6 inches too tall. Our welcome mat was the wrong color. Last month, she cited us because Frank's fishing boat wasn't properly concealed from street view." Frank shook his head. "We tried to fight it, but Margaret's got lawyers and we don't." She made us an offer last month, $50,000 below market value for our place. Said if we didn't take it, the fines would keep coming until we lost everything anyway. The picture was getting clearer, and it was uglier than I'd imagined. Margaret wasn't just going after my property, she was systematically terrorizing elderly homeowners into selling their life's work for pennies on the dollar. But the Kowalskis weren't the only victims. Next door lived Mrs. Patterson, an 84-year-old widow whose husband had built their home by hand in 1961. Margaret had hit her with $8,000 in fines for having unapproved window boxes filled with petunias her late husband had planted. Across the street, the Murphy family was facing demolition orders because their kid's swing set didn't meet visual harmony standards. The swing set their father had built as a surprise for their twin daughter's 8th birthday. By Sunday evening, I'd knocked on 12 doors and heard 12 variations of the same story. Margaret was running a sophisticated intimidation campaign, using HOA regulations like weapons to force out longtime residents and clear the way for her development plans. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd declared war on the wrong person. Monday morning, I made a phone call that would change everything. "Tommy, it's Mike. I need you to pull together our full demo crew and all our heavy equipment. We've got a big job coming up." "How big we talking, boss?" I looked out my kitchen window at the lake where my grandfather had taught me to fish, where my father had proposed to my mother, where I'd planned to bring my own kid someday. The kind of job that changes everything. Margaret struck again on Tuesday with a hand-delivered letter that made my blood boil. The HOA board had voted to declare my cabin a public nuisance and was seeking emergency court orders for immediate demolition. But attached to the legal papers was something that made me smile for the first time in weeks: a contractor bid for demolition services. Margaret had reached out to 3 companies for quotes, and guess which firm had submitted the lowest bid? Chen Demolition Services. My company. The bid had been prepared by my office manager, Rita, who handled all incoming requests. She had no idea Margaret was targeting my personal property to her. It was just another job. A job that Margaret had eagerly accepted, thrilled to get professional demolition services for $15,000 under her budget. Margaret had literally hired me to destroy my own home. I called Rita immediately. "That Thornfield job, I need you to handle all communications personally. Don't mention my name or connection to the property. As far as the client knows, I'm just another employee." "Michael, what's going on?" "I'll explain later. For now, just schedule the demolition for Friday morning. Make sure Tommy knows to wait for my signal before starting anything." The trap was set. Margaret thought she was playing chess, moving pieces across a board she controlled. But she was actually playing Russian roulette, and she just handed me the gun. Wednesday brought another surprise: Margaret's inspection of my property. She showed up with 2 men in expensive suits, introducing them as development consultants. They walked my property lines with measuring tapes and cameras, documenting every square foot like they already owned the place. One of them, a thin man with dead eyes named Carson Wells, made notes about demolition access and site preparation for foundation work. They talked openly about resort plans, a 200-room luxury hotel with a golf course and marina. "The old cabin needs to go, obviously," Wells said, pointing at my home like it was a pile of garbage. "But the lakefront footage is perfect for the main lodge." Margaret nodded eagerly. Demolition is scheduled for Friday. Once that eyesore is gone, we can break ground within 60 days. I stood on my porch, pretending to read a book while listening to them divide up my grandfather's legacy like vultures picking at roadkill. But every word they spoke was ammunition for the war I was about to unleash. That night, I made one more crucial phone call. "Sarah, I need you to file an emergency injunction. First thing Thursday morning." "On what grounds?" I'll have evidence of fraud, conspiracy to commit theft, and abuse of public office. Can you be ready? Michael, what have you done? Something my grandfather would be proud of. Thursday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching Margaret's mood as she paced outside the county courthouse. Sarah's injunction had temporarily halted the demolition, pending a hearing to examine the HOA's actions. Margaret cornered me in the courthouse parking lot, her composed mask finally slipping. "You think you're clever, don't you?" she hissed, filing last-minute paperwork, wasting everyone's time. "It won't work. I have connections you can't imagine. We'll see about that. You have no idea who you're dealing with, Mr. Chen. I've been developing lakefront properties for 15 years. I've bulldozed bigger obstacles than some sentimental fool clinging to his grandfather's shack." Her words hit like physical blows, but I kept my expression neutral. Margaret had just confessed to 15 years of property manipulation in a courthouse parking lot. My phone, recording everything, caught every damning word. Bigger obstacles. Margaret's smile turned vicious. The Morrison family thought they could fight me too. Had some sob story about their great-grandfather homesteading their land. Took me 18 months, but their little farmhouse is now the foundation of Lakeview Towers. More confessions. More evidence. Margaret was so confident in her power that she couldn't resist bragging about her conquests. "Tomorrow morning, Mr. Chen, your precious cabin becomes a pile of splinters. And by Christmas, I'll be standing in the lobby of the most exclusive resort in the state." She walked away, leaving me with a recording that would destroy her entire empire. But I wasn't done collecting evidence yet. That evening, I paid one final visit to Tommy at the equipment yard. My demolition crew was prepping for the morning job, checking hydraulics on the excavators and sharpening teeth on the bucket loaders. "Boss, I gotta ask, what's really going on here? This whole job feels wrong." Tommy had worked for me since I started the company 8 years ago. He knew every property we'd demolished, every building we'd saved. We'd done historic preservation work, carefully dismantling century-old barns to preserve their materials for restoration projects. "Tommy, how many homes have we torn down that were perfectly good?" "None. That's not our style. We demo what needs demoing, preserve what's worth saving." "And my grandfather's cabin?" Tommy's weathered face broke into a grin. "That place has more character than most of these McMansions. Your grandpa built that to last forever. Then you understand why tomorrow's job is different." I handed Tommy a sealed envelope. "Don't open this unless something goes wrong. But if Margaret Thornfield tries to force you to start without my direct approval, read what's inside." The envelope contained copies of Margaret's recorded confessions, documentation of her property manipulation scheme, and irrefutable proof that she'd been defrauding homeowners for years. But more importantly, it contained my real plan for tomorrow morning. Friday arrived with crystal clear skies and the kind of autumn air that made you grateful to be alive. The demolition crew rolled up at 5:45 a.m., 15 minutes ahead of schedule. Margaret was already waiting, dressed like she was attending a victory parade instead of a demolition. She had brought a photographer to document the destruction of my home, probably for some twisted portfolio of her conquests. "Gentlemen, let's get this done quickly and efficiently," she announced to my crew. "I have investors coming at noon to see the cleared site." Tommy looked at me questioningly. I was standing 50 feet away, wearing my company shirt and safety helmet, looking exactly like any other crew member. Margaret hadn't recognized me yet. In her mind, I was just another working-class grunt whose opinion didn't matter. That was about to change. I pulled out my phone and called Tommy's direct line. The sound of his ringtone cut through the morning air like a starting pistol. "Tommy, shut it down. All of it. Right now." 20 tons of steel and machinery fell silent in perfect unison. Margaret's face went through a fascinating color change: confusion, then recognition, then pure rage. "You," she breathed, pointing at me like she'd seen a ghost. "You're Michael Chen, owner of Chen Demolition Services. The company you hired to destroy my home." Margaret's photographer kept snapping pictures, unknowingly documenting the moment her entire scheme imploded. "This is fraud," she screamed. You deliberately, this isn't legal." "Actually, it's completely legal. You hired my company through proper channels, signed a standard service contract, and paid our standard rates. The fact that you didn't bother to research who you were hiring isn't my problem." Tommy walked over with a clipboard thick with permits and documentation. "Boss, all our paperwork is in order. We're fully licensed, bonded, and insured. But seeing as how this is your property, I'm guessing you don't want us to demo it?" "That's correct." "Pack it up." Margaret was practically vibrating with fury. "You can't do this. I have a court order." "Actually, you don't." Sarah Martinez appeared as if by magic, carrying a briefcase that looked heavy enough to contain Margaret's entire doom. "The emergency injunction stands, pending a full investigation into HOA practices." "Investigation?" Sarah smiled the way sharks smile just before they attack. "Based on evidence provided by my client, the State Attorney General's office is very interested in your property acquisition methods, Mrs. Thornfield." The photographer, apparently realizing he was documenting something much more newsworthy than a simple demolition, kept shooting as Margaret's world crumbled around her. "Evidence? What evidence?" I pulled out my phone and played back her courthouse parking lot confession. Her voice, crystal clear, bragging about bulldozing bigger obstacles and turning family homes into luxury developments. "You recorded me without consent." "Actually, in this state, only one party needs to consent to recording." "I consented to recording my own conversation." Sarah opened her briefcase and handed Margaret a thick legal document. "Class action lawsuit, filed on behalf of every homeowner you've defrauded over the past 3 years. The Kowalskis, Mrs. Patterson, the Murphy family, they're all co-plaintiffs." Margaret's hands shook as she flipped through pages of charges. Fraud, conspiracy, abuse of public office, elder abuse. The list went on for 12 pages. "You can't prove any of this." "We can, and we will." "You made one crucial mistake, Margaret. You got greedy." Sarah pulled out a second folder. "Financial records show you've purchased 17 lakefront properties through shell companies over the past 3 years. Always the same pattern: harassment through frivolous HOA violations, forced sales at below market prices, immediate resale to developers at massive profits." Margaret's photographer was getting some fantastic shots of her complete meltdown. "The Morrison farm you bragged about destroying? The family you forced out? Their great-great-granddaughter is now a forensic accountant with the FBI. She's been tracking your money laundering operation for 6 months. But the best part was still coming." "There's one more thing," I said, walking closer to Margaret until she was backed against her luxury sedan. "Remember that lovely conversation you had yesterday with Carson Wells about demolition access and foundation work?" Margaret's face went pale. "How could you possibly?" "Wells isn't a development consultant. He's an undercover investigator with the State Real Estate Fraud Division. Every word you said about resort plans, every admission about forcing out homeowners, it's all documented." The photographer actually applauded. Turned out he wasn't Margaret's hired gun at all. He was a freelance journalist who'd been investigating HOA abuse across the state. "Mrs. Thornfield, I'm Jake Morrison with the County Herald. Would you care to comment on allegations that you've been systematically defrauding elderly homeowners?" Margaret looked around desperately, realizing she was completely surrounded by the very people she'd tried to destroy. "My demolition crew, my lawyer, an FBI forensic accountant, an undercover investigator, and a journalist documenting everything. She tried to run. Sarah's voice stopped her cold. I wouldn't recommend leaving the state, Mrs. Thornfield. Federal investigators tend to take that poorly. Margaret's downfall played out over the following months like the world's most satisfying slow-motion disaster. The state attorney general's office moved fast once they saw our evidence. Margaret's assets were frozen within a week, her HOA presidency revoked, and criminal charges filed by month's end. The class action lawsuit became a media sensation. HOA horror stories segments ran on 3 different news channels, with my cabin serving as the photogenic backdrop for stories about corporate greed and community corruption. But the real satisfaction came in the smaller moments. The Kowalskis got their $12,000 back, plus damages. They used part of the settlement to buy a dozen new garden gnomes, the most aesthetically incompatible ones they could find. Mrs. Patterson planted a memorial garden for her late husband, filling it with every variety of non-approved flowers she could grow. The petunias were spectacular that summer. The Murphy family rebuilt their swing set, bigger and brighter than before, adding a slide and monkey bars that definitely didn't meet visual harmony standards. And my cabin? It stands exactly as Grandpa built it, weathered cedar and all. The county granted it historic landmark status, making it permanently protected from future Margaret Thornfields. The demolition company angle turned out to be the key to everything. Margaret's recorded confessions might have been enough for criminal charges, but catching her in the act of hiring my own company to destroy my home? That was the kind of ironic justice that juries love and judges remember. During her sentencing hearing, the judge made a point that stuck with everyone in the courtroom. Mrs. Thornfield, you spent 3 years systematically destroying people's homes and dreams. The fact that you unknowingly hired your final victim to carry out your scheme shows a level of arrogance and disregard for others that this court finds particularly disturbing. Margaret got 18 months in federal prison, plus restitution, that would keep her financially underwater for decades. But the best revenge came later, in a way Margaret never saw coming. 6 months after Margaret's conviction, I got a call from the Lakeside Estates Homeowners Association, what was left of it after Margaret's criminal enterprise collapsed. Mr. Chen, we'd like to offer you the position of HOA president. I accepted on one condition. The first order of business would be dissolving the HOA entirely. The vote was unanimous. Today, Crystal Lake looks exactly like it did when my grandfather first built his cabin 70 years ago. Natural cedar homes with character and history. Gardens full of native wildflowers and aesthetically incompatible gnomes. Docks that extend as far into the water as their owners want them to reach. And in the spot where Margaret had planned to build her 200-room luxury resort, there's now a community park, funded by the restitution money from her conviction. The centerpiece is a restored 1,950s pavilion built with lumber salvaged from the Morrison family farmhouse she'd destroyed years earlier. Margaret's photographer, the journalist who'd been investigating HOA abuse, won a state press award for his series on lakefront property fraud. The opening photo showed Margaret's face at the exact moment she realized she'd hired me to destroy my own home. The expression of pure shock and dawning comprehension became something of an internet meme. When you're so evil you accidentally hire your victim to help with your crime became a popular caption. But my favorite photo from that morning wasn't Margaret's reaction. It was Tommy and my crew, all 20 guys in their Chen Demolition shirts, standing in front of my grandfather's cabin with the biggest grins you've ever seen. They'd known all along that we'd never actually tear down that beautiful old place. But they'd played their parts perfectly, letting Margaret think she was in control, right up until the moment she realized she'd never controlled anything at all. The state used Margaret's case to pass new legislation protecting homeowners from HOA abuse. The Thornfield Act requires independent oversight of all homeowner association enforcement actions and creates serious criminal penalties for fraudulent property schemes. Other states have copied the legislation, and Margaret's name is now permanently attached to laws protecting the exact people she'd spent years terrorizing. It's the kind of legacy she definitely didn't plan on leaving behind. But sometimes, justice has a sense of irony that's more poetic than anything Hollywood could write. These days, I still run Chen Demolition Services, but we've expanded our focus. We now specialize in helping families preserve historic properties and fighting back against predatory development schemes. My grandfather's cabin serves as our company headquarters, a living reminder that some things are too important to tear down, no matter how much money someone offers or how many legal threats they make. And every morning, when I sit on that slightly sagging porch with my coffee, watching the sun rise over Crystal Lake, I think about Margaret Thornfield sitting in her prison cell, probably still wondering how her foolproof plan went so spectacularly wrong. The answer is simple. She forgot that sometimes the person you're trying to destroy is the same person who holds the power to build or demolish your entire world. Margaret tried to bulldoze my family legacy. Instead, she bulldozed her own life. And the best part? She paid me $15,000 to do it. Next week, I'm supposed to get a call from another HOA president in the next county over. Apparently, they've been having some compliance issues with longtime residents and want to discuss hiring a demolition company for enforcement purposes. I can't wait to see the look on their face when they realize who they're talking to. After all, Chen Demolition Services has a reputation for taking down exactly the right structures. Sometimes that's old buildings that need to go. Sometimes it's corrupt systems that deserve to crumble. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very stupid like Margaret Thornfield, it's both at the same time. The phone's already ringing. Time to get back to work.